What up, homie G? This is Leon, the Paperback Maniac. Super excited to be bringing you guys the inaugural video for movie Mayhem. Because you see, it's May, and I can never pass up the opportunity for a terrible pun. So this month, we're going to be looking at all things movie-related. So every book I review will be at least tangentially related to movies, films. I'm also planning on doing a couple of extra sort of movie-related videos, collection videos. So yeah, it should be a lot of fun. By the way, if anyone can guess which 80s film this t-shirt is referencing, leave a comment below. I will be very impressed. It is not a horror film. So tonight, we are looking at Screenplay by Douglas Soebe. This book was published by Diamond in 1990. And just take a moment to process that wonderfully absurd and cheesy cover art, which is so emblematic, it so perfectly encapsulates where the horror genre was in 1990, namely on its way out, at least commercially speaking. So, as usual, I will read the synopsis from the back cover. It's only a movie. The Odeon Theater is scheduled for demolition. There's only one problem. The movie house, born of a dark and evil ritual, refuses to die. The lights dim. The terror begins. Flesh-hungry rats scurry after human prey. Zombies stalk a moonlit graveyard. A chainsaw buzzes to life. Tonight, the curtain rises for one final screening. The audience is held captive by blood-curdling horror. But this time, the blood is their own. The horror is real. Screenplay. There will be no intermission and no escape. Now, I know this is going to shock a lot of you, but that synopsis kind of makes this book sound a lot scarier and crazier and wilder than it actually is. Believe it or not, despite the punny and cheesy title and cover art here, this book is almost more of a character piece. And that's not a bad thing, it's not a bad thing, but it wasn't exactly what I expected when I started reading it. So basically, this book opens with a prologue, as so many of these vintage paperback horror novels do. And it is the summer of 1931 and the grand opening of the Odeon Theater. Now, this is not like the theaters of today. This is a lavish, opulent theater, and it's a town event. Everyone is there, the mayor, the press, and it's a huge deal. It's grand, grand back in the day when they had these amazing theaters. No one is more excited for the opening of the Odeon Theater than 16-year-old Jack Magruder, who has been waiting impatiently for this theater to open, ever since it was announced, and has got a job as an usher, which he's very excited for. Now, unfortunately, his zealousness kind of gets the better of him, and Jack gets caught watching the film while he's supposed to be on the clock, and is whisked away by the manager to the men's room, where he may have been sexually molested. It is sort of implied, but not directly stated. But he's in the restroom, and he's like putting his clothes back on in shame. And then he notices a pool of blood spreading from underneath one of the toilet stalls. He goes and opens the toilet stall and finds the murdered corpse of the mayor's wife. The mayor's beautiful wife has been murdered. He freaks out, gets the hell out of there. A couple hours later, he's at his favorite hiding spot on a hill overlooking the town, and then he comes across the creepy architect of the theater, a guy named Forbes Carlton, who pins him to the ground and dangles this bloody bag over his head, says these weird things, makes him look in the bag, and kind of drives the kid a little crazy. Now, then we flash forward to the present day, we meet a woman named Karen who is from this same small California town where the Odeon Theater was. She's now living in LA, and she's sort of dealing with the demons of her past. You see, when she was a teenager, she had been attacked in that same theater, the Odeon, and raped. And then she tried to unsuccessfully or successfully give herself an abortion with a coat hanger. And she, by doing that, damaged her reproductive organs, so she can no longer have any kids. So actually, at the start of the novel, she's trying to adopt, and she's still haunted by this terrible thing that happened to her. And lately, she's been having the strange things have been happening to her. She's seeing visions of creatures, like a creature from actually that appears to be from the film that she was watching at the Odeon Cinema the night that she was attacked and raped. And she's been thinking a lot about her boyfriend, whom she hasn't seen, or her old flame, who kind of left her supposedly after that night when she was attacked at the theater. All these questions, so she decides to go back to her hometown and face her fears and get some answers, figure out what's going on. So she goes back to this town, teams up with an old friend named Paul, who is also from this town but is living in LA. He was a failed director who now runs a video rental shop in Silver Lake. And by the way, there's a really cool scene near the beginning of him working in the video rental shop and shelving like old horror tapes, kind of nostalgic. But they go back now. At the present moment of 1990, when this book is set, the Odeon has lost, sadly, its former glory. It has fallen into disrepair. It has become sort of dilapidated, and it's struggling. It's not doing well. People don't really give a shit about going to these old movie palaces by 1990. Basically, the video rental, the video rental market has really killed it and is killing it, and it is set for demolition. Now, 16-year-old Jack from the prologue, now an older man, is the owner. He actually bought the Odeon Theater, and he still treats it seriously. Even though it's no longer glorious, he still wears his tux every day, and tries to make it seem like it's something special, even though really it's not. But sadly, the Odeon is slated for demolition, and Jack is setting up basically a final sort of closing night ceremony where he wants to recreate sort of the grandeur of the opening night ceremony that we read about in the prologue. Now, the janitor of the Odeon is a man named Carl Irvine, who has a connection to Karen, the woman who's come to town to find some answers. And he sadly is afflicted with this terrible malady. He's basically has this hump on his back, which causes him to not be able to stand up straight, and he experiences excruciating pain when he tries to walk, because of a fall that he took when he tried to commit suicide earlier in life. He knows that this theater is actually alive and evil. He thinks that this theater is up to no good, and it's not going to be so easy getting rid of it. And he worries about that, and he feels like something bad is definitely going to happen. And indeed, strange things soon do start to happen. A teenage couple who kind of hides out in the theater after closing time to try to do a little hanky-panky in the restroom. They are attacked by rats, which emerge from the toilet and eat the boy alive. We also have the projectionist of the theater, who's actually the brother of Jack, and who's kind of pissed off that Jack is not selling off a lot of the expensive artifacts of the theater as promised, and he wants to go ahead and set the theater on fire to gain insurance money. But on his way, there's kind of a funny scene of him carrying cans of gasoline across a park, trying to sneakily get to the theater to set it on fire. He gets approached by a comical fat man and a thin man who seem an awful lot like Laurel and Hardy, who comically burn him alive, but goofily on accident. Kind of a funny scene. So that happens. And just a bunch of just strange things happen. There's a town creep, a 17-year-old, kind of like the village idiot, a guy who, well, I guess he's like mentally retarded. This guy who always wears a yellow rain slicker and walks around carrying a paper sack in which he keeps animals that he likes to torture, and he goes to the Odeon every night and likes to watch movies while these like poor animals are slowly dying in his paper sack. He goes to the Odeon one night. He kind of breaks in there like after hours, but he curiously finds that it's all lit up seemingly just for him. He goes to the concession stand. His favorite snacks are there ready and waiting for him. You know, large buttered popcorn, candy, a large Coca-Cola. So he goes into the theater with all his snacks, sits down for the show to start. The curtains refuse to open, and he starts to get a little pissed off. He's about to get up to like figure out what's going on, but he finds that he can't move. He's immobilized. Then suddenly he starts bloating up. He finds that his tongue swells up so that he can't speak. He looks at his arm, and his flesh seems to be undulating. And then he looks at the skin of his arm and notices a line kind of forming on his arm that splits open, and he basically like the skin of his arm, kind of the lips of the cut open up, and all of this blood and pulp kind of issue forth. And then another hand emerges out of his arm and flexes, you know, of its own volition. And then this happens out of his neck and his back and his face. And slowly this other being emerges out of him. And a mysterious being known as the Kid, who, of course, ends up being a vaudevillian, a magician who used to work in vaudeville and who is a practitioner of the dark arts, who used to run a church of Satan, and who needs child sacrifices, wants to keep this theater alive, but needs children to sacrifice to the theater so that it can regenerate itself and go back to its former glory. So there are moments in this book, such as what I mentioned, also from the synopsis, you know, the aforementioned rat attack scene. The zombie scene is kind of little half-assed, if I may say so. There are isolated scenes that are good. However, as I said before, it is not so much like a super fast-paced kind of like, you know, balls-to-the-wall crazy horror novel. This is not like an Onyx horror title or a Leisure or a St. Martin's Press. Definitely a little slower paced and more focused on the characters, you know, which is fine if that's, you know, but you should be expecting that. Definitely can tell that Mr. Soesbe, this is the only horror novel he ever wrote. I think he did go on to do some screenwriting after this, but you can definitely tell he's from the Stephen King camp. Definitely feels like there's a pretty heavy King influence here. But yeah, it is well written. It is actually very well written. I was surprised, and you know, there is some good imagery here. So that was entertaining. Actually, this book reminded me quite a lot of another book that I reviewed on this channel called Dream House by Douglas Borton, wherein, you know, both of those novels deal with movies and sort of like, you know, the fantasy of horror movies kind of merging with reality, and with, you know, and where reality starts to kind of you know, bend, and the craziness of horror movies kind of invade reality. If I had read this book before reading Dream House, I might have liked this a little more. I think comparing the two, this one suffers because Dream House was one of the most inventive and just enjoyable romps I had read in a while. And I think, you know, if you are in the mood for a sort of a horror-themed book, I would say that I would recommend that one over this one. Although, you know, this one does have its merits, but I think, you know, Dream House, you know, they're similar. That one is superior. That one is definitely also more violent, more gory. It's got the stuff that I like. Also, that one is very well written, as this one is. But yeah, this one, it was good. You know, this is fine. You know, solid, I would say 3.5, you know, if I have to give it a number rating. The ending was a little, you know, there's a lot of coincidences and contrivances in this book, which you kind of have to, suspend disbelief. Definitely a little Deus Ex Machina at the end, and it does end a little kumbaya for my taste. It does kind of wrap up a little too neatly, all except for the one character that actually it doesn't end up happily for. You do feel bad for the owner of the theater, Jack Magruder, the guy who was the usher in the beginning and who became the owner, because he's just so sad about what happened to the theater. And I think that is one of the, the sad parts of this book are just like, the fact that there's really no place in the modern times for those kinds of lavish movie theaters. Or, if we wanted to take this to today, I mean, just theaters in general, I think have been struggling for a while now, I mean, back in the 80s and 90s, it was, it was home video, it was, VHS and cable, now it's streaming and, Netflix. It's kind of funny how, basically in this book, it's talking about how home video killed the theater experience. And now, I mean, streaming and Netflix killed home video. I mean, no one rents movies anymore. Barely anyone other than weirdos like me buy movies anymore, not even like Blu-rays. It just makes you wonder, like in 30 years, what is going to replace streaming and, that kind of thing. Like, I can't even imagine what it would be. Just like probably 30 years, back when this was written, they couldn't imagine the idea of like the internet and streaming movies on demand like that. But yeah, interesting book. Good, not great. I mean, not excellent, but definitely worth it if you like, well-written horror stories. Not kind of a little light on the horror, but there are a couple of fun, intense scenes in there. So yeah, screenplay, check it out if you've come across it. I don't know how, what the availability of that one is like, but yeah, it was fine. It was good. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the review. Stay tuned for more movie-themed stuff in May for Movie Mayhem, right? And I do have the hyphen in there. I'm very clever. So yeah, catch you guys later. Take it easy. Peace out.